Welcome to the Story Atelier, where the most captivating stories come to life with passion and heart. This is your space for thrilling, heartfelt, and meaningful tales, from powerful life lessons to unforgettable moments of suspense and inspiration. We don't just tell stories, we take you on emotional journeys, delivering lessons that resonate and offering fresh perspectives on life. If you're ready to be part of this adventure, hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you never miss an exciting new story. Every subscription and every share from you is the fuel that drives us to create even more extraordinary content. Let's build a community of story lovers, where emotions and experiences are celebrated and shared. Thank you for stopping by and joining us here at the Story Atelier. Today, we're bringing you a powerful and unexpected story. Racist officer stops black man, then learns he's the head of internal affairs. This isn't just a tale of confrontation and change, it's a profound reminder of justice, accountability, and the true meaning of the badge. The story begins with a tense encounter between a police officer and a man he underestimated. But things take a dramatic turn when the truth comes to light, forcing the officer to confront his own biases in a way he never saw coming. Join us as we delve into this impactful story and uncover the valuable lessons behind it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of the thought-provoking stories we share. Let's spread these important messages far and wide together. The sun dipped low over the sprawling streets of Los Angeles, casting a warm amber glow across the horizon. The city's usual hum of traffic filled the air, a constant backdrop to the lives of millions. Among them was Marcus Evans, a marketing executive in his early 40s, wrapping up another exhausting day at the office. His sleek black sedan purred down Ventura Boulevard, a symbol of his meticulous nature and professional success. Marcus adjusted the volume on his car stereo, letting a smooth jazz track wash over him. It was his usual antidote to the chaos of the day. As he approached an intersection, the light turned yellow. He slowed, coasting to a gentle stop as it shifted to red. Suddenly, the piercing wail of a siren shattered the evening calm. Blue and red lights flared in his rearview mirror. Marcus frowned, glancing back to see a police cruiser pulling up behind him. With a resigned sigh, he signaled and eased his car to the curb. Rolling down his window, out stepped Officer Ryan Carter, a man in his mid-30s with a buzz cut and a noticeable air of authority. His polished badge gleamed in the setting sun, but his expression was hard, almost scrutinizing. Marcus noted the deliberate way Carter adjusted his utility belt as he approached. "License and registration," Carter demanded curtly, his voice carrying a sharp edge. Marcus nodded, calm and compliant. He reached into his glove compartment and retrieved his documents, passing them to Carter without a word. He felt the officer's eyes on him, probing, searching for something beyond the routine. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Carter asked, leaning slightly into the car window. "No, officer," Marcus replied evenly. "I stopped at the light." Carter hesitated, his lips tightening briefly. "Not quickly enough," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Marcus arched a brow but remained silent, watching as Carter's gaze lingered on him longer than seemed necessary. This wasn't about a minor infraction anymore. The shift in Carter's posture, the slight narrowing of his eyes, it all suggested something deeper. Something personal. "You're not local, are you?" Carter continued, scrutinizing the address on Marcus's license. "I moved here a few months ago," Marcus replied simply. "My address is current." The response seemed to irritate Carter. He straightened, tucking Marcus's documents into his pocket. "Step out of the car," he ordered. Marcus hesitated, gripping the steering wheel slightly tighter. "May I ask why?" he inquired, his tone polite yet firm. Carter's expression hardened. "Because I said so," he snapped. "Unless you want this to get complicated." Marcus exhaled, unbuckling his seatbelt and opening the car door. He stepped out, his tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the officer's rigid demeanor. Standing a head taller than Carter, Marcus kept his posture neutral, his expression calm. "Hands where I can see them," Carter barked, gesturing toward the hood of the car. Marcus complied, moving with deliberate precision. "What are you looking for, officer?" he asked, his voice steady. "Routine check," Carter said, though his smirk suggested otherwise. "You can never be too careful." The air between them grew tense, heavy with unspoken implications. Marcus's calm demeanor seemed to unnerve Carter, whose questions grew sharper, more accusatory. Each inquiry was laced with an underlying assumption, a bias that became increasingly apparent. As Carter began a pat-down, his movements were brisk, almost aggressive, but Marcus didn't flinch. He stood firm, his composure unbroken. "You're clean," Carter muttered begrudgingly, stepping back. "Of course I am," Marcus replied coolly. "Now, if you're done." "I'm not done," Carter interjected, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "You seem awfully familiar with how this works. Care to explain why?" Marcus turned to face him, his gaze level. "I believe in knowing my rights," he said. "It's a principle I hold dear." Carter's jaw tightened. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he growled, stepping closer. "Trying to talk your way out of this?" "I'm just asking for fairness," Marcus replied evenly. "Isn't that what the law is about?" The question hung in the air, a quiet challenge. Carter's eyes narrowed, his hand twitching near his belt. For a moment, the two men stood locked in a silent standoff, the tension crackling like static electricity. Then Marcus spoke again, his tone soft but firm. "Perhaps it's time you knew who I am, Officer Carter." Carter scoffed, his confidence faltering ever so slightly. "I don't care who you are," he snapped. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket with deliberate slowness. "I'm retrieving my badge," he said, his eyes fixed on Carter's hand hovering near his holster. "No need for theatrics." From his pocket, Marcus produced a leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing the unmistakable badge of the Los Angeles Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. "Marcus Evans," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "Director of Internal Affairs." Carter froze, his eyes darting between the badge and Marcus's face. His confident facade cracked, replaced by a flicker of panic. "Internal Affairs?" Carter stammered. "Yes," Marcus replied. "And now, Officer Carter, I think we need to have a conversation about conduct." The moment seemed to stretch endlessly as Officer Ryan Carter's gaze flicked between Marcus Evans's badge and his impassive face. The sun had fully set by now, casting the streets in a dim, muted glow. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the faint hum of traffic passing in the distance. "Internal Affairs," Carter repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped back, almost as if trying to create a physical barrier between himself and the weight of the badge in Marcus's hand. "Yes," Marcus confirmed, his tone measured. "My division investigates officer misconduct. And I must say, Officer Carter, this interaction has been enlightening." Carter's face flushed, a mix of anger and embarrassment. "Look," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "this is just protocol. A routine stop." "A routine stop?" Marcus echoed, his brow arching. "Tell me, Officer Carter, does your protocol include profiling? Unnecessary escalation? Or was this simply a personal improvisation?" Carter bristled, his jaw tightening. "I don't know what you're implying," he snapped, but his tone lacked conviction. "I was doing my job." "Were you?" Marcus asked, taking a step forward. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were trying to manufacture a problem where none existed." The tension crackled like a live wire. Carter glanced around, as though hoping for an escape route that didn't exist. His hand hovered near his belt, more out of nervous reflex than anything else. "You think you can stand there and judge me?" Carter spat, his voice rising. "You don't know what it's like out here. Every day, we deal with criminals, liars, people who'd sooner stab you than look at you." "I was being cautious." "Cautious," Marcus repeated, his voice heavy with skepticism. "Interesting choice of words. Tell me, Officer Carter, what exactly about me screamed danger? Was it my suit, my car, or perhaps my skin color?" The question hit its mark, and Carter recoiled slightly, his bravado faltering. He opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus cut him off. "Let me save you the trouble," Marcus continued, his tone sharper now. "This wasn't about a traffic violation. It wasn't about caution or safety. This was about you exerting power over someone you thought couldn't push back." Carter's face turned a deeper shade of red, but he said nothing. His silence was damning. Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "You don't have to say it, Carter. Your actions speak volumes, and trust me, they'll be recorded in my report." "Your report?" Carter snapped, his voice trembling with a mix of defiance and fear. "What? You're going to ruin my career over this? Over nothing?" "Nothing," Marcus repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You think this is nothing? Do you know how many people have been on the receiving end of this kind of treatment? How many have walked away feeling humiliated, powerless, or worse, and you have the audacity to call it nothing?" Carter opened his mouth, but Marcus held up a hand, silencing him. "This isn't about your career, Carter. It's about the badge you wear. That badge represents trust, integrity, and service. Every time you use it to intimidate or demean, you don't just fail as an officer, you fail as a person." For a moment, the only sound was the distant murmur of the city. Carter stood frozen, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Marcus, for his part, exuded an unshakable calm, his gaze steady and unrelenting. Finally, Carter broke the silence. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice low and strained. "I want you to think," Marcus replied. "I want you to remember that every decision you make in that uniform affects not just you, but the community you're sworn to protect. Tonight, you had a choice, to be fair, or to let your biases dictate your actions. And you chose poorly." Carter looked away, his shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of Marcus's words. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued. "You're going to return my license and registration. Then you're going to think long and hard about this interaction, because the next time I see your name, it might not be on the side of a road. It might be in a disciplinary hearing." Carter hesitated, his hand twitching near his pocket. Slowly, reluctantly, he pulled out Marcus's documents and handed them over. His fingers trembled slightly as Marcus took them. Marcus tucked the papers into his wallet and stepped toward his car. His hand rested on the door handle, but he paused, glancing back at Carter one last time. "Remember this, Officer Carter," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The badge isn't a shield for your ego. It's a symbol of accountability. If you can't respect that, you don't deserve to wear it." With that, Marcus slid into his car and started the engine. The purr of the vehicle was a sharp contrast to the heavy silence left in his wake. He drove off, leaving Carter standing alone under the dim streetlights, his confidence shattered and his thoughts racing. As Marcus navigated the quiet streets toward home, his mind was far from settled. The interaction had struck a nerve, not because it was unique, but because it wasn't. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered someone like Carter, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. The question that lingered, however, was what to do next. Marcus wasn't just another citizen. He had the authority, and the responsibility, to act. And as the city lights blurred past his window, he resolved to ensure that tonight wouldn't be just another forgotten incident. The next morning, Marcus sat at his desk in the sleek, modern offices of the LAPD's Internal Affairs Division. A file lay open before him, Officer Ryan Carter. His record was far from spotless, littered with complaints of misconduct and vague misunderstandings that had been brushed under the rug. Marcus leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. This wasn't just about Carter. It was about the culture that allowed officers like him to operate unchecked. And Marcus knew that addressing one man's behavior wouldn't fix the system. But it was a start. A knock at his office door pulled Marcus from his thoughts. His assistant, Rachel, stepped in, a folder in hand. "Morning, Director Evans," she said, her tone professional but warm. "The summary of last month's cases. As requested. Also, Chief Langston wanted to confirm your attendance at the Oversight Committee meeting this afternoon." "Thanks, Rachel," Marcus replied, taking the folder. "Can you also schedule a meeting with the chief for tomorrow? I have some things I need to discuss." Rachel nodded, sensing the weight behind his words. "Of course," she said before leaving the room. Marcus returned his attention to the file in front of him. He wasn't just looking at Carter's history, he was looking at a symptom of a much larger problem. And he was determined to find a cure. The meeting room buzzed with subdued chatter as Marcus Evans entered, his demeanor calm but commanding. The Oversight Committee had gathered in full force, officers, administrators, and even a handful of community representatives. Chief Langston, a seasoned officer with salt and pepper hair and a reputation for pragmatism, sat at the head of the table. His sharp eyes followed Marcus as he took his seat. "Thank you all for coming," Langston began, his voice firm. "Today's agenda includes several pressing matters, not least of which is an incident Director Evans brought to my attention last night." "Marcus, you have the floor." Marcus stood, placing a slim folder on the table in front of him. He scanned the room briefly, noting the mix of curiosity and apprehension in the faces around him. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "Last night, I experienced firsthand what many in our community have voiced concerns about for years, an encounter with an officer that escalated unnecessarily, driven by assumptions rather than evidence." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. A murmur rippled through the room, but no one interrupted. The officer in question, Ryan Carter, conducted a routine traffic stop that quickly became anything but routine. Marcus continued. His actions reflected not just poor judgment but a deeper issue within our department, one that can't be ignored any longer. Langston leaned forward, his expression neutral but attentive. "And what issue would that be?" "Director, culture," Marcus replied. "A culture that allows officers to act on biases without accountability. A culture that tolerates misconduct as long as it doesn't attract too much attention. We've swept too many incidents under the rug. Chief, that stops now." The room fell silent. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade into the background. Marcus opened the folder, revealing a stack of reports. "These are complaints filed over the past year," he said, gesturing to the papers. "Some involve minor infractions, others more serious allegations. What they have in common is a pattern. Officers like Carter repeatedly walking the line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior, knowing they're unlikely to face real consequences." "Are you suggesting we haven't been addressing these issues?" Langston asked, his tone cautious. "I'm suggesting we haven't been addressing them effectively," Marcus replied. "We react to symptoms but ignore the disease. If we want real change, we need to stop treating misconduct as isolated incidents and start looking at the bigger picture." Langston sat back, his expression thoughtful. "And what do you propose we do?" Marcus's gaze swept the room. locking eyes with several attendees. A department-wide audit, he said, not just of individual offices but of our training programs, our disciplinary procedures, and our engagement with the community. We need to identify the gaps and address them head-on. The room erupted into murmurs, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged skeptical glances. One officer, a burly man with a stern face, raised his hand. "Director Evans," he began, his tone wary, "an audit of that scale will ruffle a lot of feathers. You're talking about turning the department upside down. Are you prepared for the backlash?" Marcus met the man's gaze evenly. If feathers need to be ruffled to restore trust and integrity, then so be it. Our responsibility is to the people we serve, not to our egos or comfort. The officer didn't reply, but his expression softened slightly, as though reluctantly acknowledging the point. Langston cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention back to him. "Marcus, I admire your conviction, but audits, reviews, these take time. They require resources, coordination. What do you propose we do in the meantime?" Marcus nodded, as if expecting the question. "In the meantime, we start with accountability. Officer Carter will face an internal hearing, not as a scapegoat, but as an example that misconduct, however minor it may seem, won't be tolerated." Langston's gaze narrowed slightly. "You're aware of the implications?" "I am," Marcus replied firmly, "and I'm ready to stand by them." The hearing for Officer Ryan Carter was scheduled for the following week, and news of it spread quickly through the department. Some offices grumbled about witch hunts and political overreach, while others expressed quiet support, thankful that someone was finally addressing long-standing issues. Carter, for his part, was a mix of defiant and nervous. He spent the days leading up to the hearing in a state of restless tension, vacillating between anger and regret. His colleagues were no help. Some offered sympathy, while others distanced themselves, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. When the day arrived, the hearing room was packed. Marcus sat at the head of the panel, flanked by two other senior officers. Carter stood at attention, his posture rigid but his eyes betraying his unease. "Officer Carter," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "This hearing is not about condemnation. It's about accountability. We're here to understand your actions, their motivations, and their implications. Do you understand?" Carter nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." Over the next hour, Marcus led a thorough review of the incident. Carter was questioned about his decisions, his assumptions, and his approach to the stop. The panel listened intently, their expressions neutral but their scrutiny unmistakable. When the questioning ended, Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Officer Carter, do you believe your actions during that stop reflected the values of this department?" Carter hesitated, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for the right words. Finally, he said, "I believe I was trying to do my job, sir, but I made mistakes." Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. "Acknowledging mistakes is a start, but it's not enough. This isn't just about you, Officer Carter. It's about what you represent. Every interaction you have in that uniform shapes how the public views this department. Do you understand the weight of that responsibility?" "Yes, sir," Carter replied quietly, his defiance giving way to something closer to humility. The panel deliberated for another hour before rendering the decision: a suspension without pay, mandatory training on de-escalation and bias, and a probationary period upon his return. Carter accepted the verdict with a resigned nod. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge wasn't punishing one officer, it was preventing the next Carter from slipping through the cracks. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into the audit. He met with officers, reviewed policies, and held public forums to gather input from the community. The process was grueling, but the momentum was undeniable. Stories of reform began to spread, and while not everyone was on board, the tide was turning. For Marcus, the work was personal. Each meeting, each report, each late night at the office was a step toward a vision of a department that served not just with power, but with honor. Weeks turned into months, and the ripple effects of Marcus Evans's reforms began to take hold within the Los Angeles Police Department. The department-wide audit, though met with resistance at first, uncovered troubling patterns, issues that had long festered beneath the surface. These weren't just about isolated incidents, they were systemic, woven into the culture of a force that had lost its way in some respects. Marcus had become a figurehead of change. Officers who initially doubted him began to see the merit in his work, while others clung to their skepticism, fearing the disruption of the status quo. The community, however, was taking notice. Forums that once overflowed with anger and frustration were now filled with cautious optimism, as residents saw their concerns being addressed with sincerity. But the road ahead was far from easy. Change, Marcus knew, was never without its cost. The sun was setting over downtown Los Angeles as Marcus sat in his office, reviewing a final draft of the department's new accountability framework. It was the culmination of months of effort, rewriting policies, enhancing training programs, and instituting clear consequences for misconduct. The document was thick with recommendations, but it represented a vision of what the LAPD could become. A knock at the door drew his attention. Rachel, his ever-efficient assistant, stepped in. "Director Evans, Chief Langston is here to see you," she said, her tone formal but tinged with warmth. "Send him in," Marcus replied, setting the document aside. Langston entered, his expression a mix of fatigue and respect. He carried a file under one arm and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. "Evening, Marcus," Langston said, lowering himself into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "I wanted to catch you before you left." "I figured," Marcus replied with a small smile. "What's on your mind?" Langston placed the file on the desk. "The preliminary results from the audit," he said. "Thought you'd want to see them before they go public." Marcus opened the file, his eyes scanning the pages quickly. The results were both sobering and validating. The data confirmed what he had suspected: patterns of bias, inconsistent disciplinary actions, and inadequate training protocols. But alongside the grim statistics were signs of progress, officers expressing support for the reforms, reports of improved community interactions, and a noticeable drop in complaints over the past 2 months. "This is a start," Marcus said, closing the file, "but we've got a long way to go." Langston nodded. "True, but it's more progress than we've made in years. That's because of you." Marcus shook his head. "It's not about me, it's about the department, and the people we serve." Langston studied Marcus for a moment before leaning forward. "You've done something remarkable here, Marcus. You've made people believe change is possible. But you've also put a target on your back. Not everyone's thrilled about the direction we're heading." Marcus met Langston's gaze evenly. "If that's the price of doing the right thing, I'll pay it." Langston smirked faintly. "I figured you'd say that. Just watch your 6. Not every fight is worth the scars." Marcus nodded, appreciating the sentiment. "I'll keep that in mind." The following week, Marcus stood at a podium in the community center, addressing a crowd of officers, city officials, and residents. The room buzzed with energy, a mix of hope, skepticism, and curiosity. This was the official unveiling of the department's reform plan, and Marcus knew it was a pivotal moment. "Good evening," he began, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "Thank you all for being here tonight. We're gathered here not because everything is perfect, but because we've recognized that it isn't, and were committed to fixing it. He paused, letting his words sink in. Over the past months, we've taken a hard look at ourselves. He continued. We've acknowledged mistakes, listened to concerns, and begun the work of rebuilding trust. This reform plan isn't just about policies. It's about accountability, integrity, and respect, the principles that should guide every officer who wears this badge. Marcus gestured to a large screen behind him, where key elements of the reform plan were displayed: enhanced de-escalation training, transparent disciplinary procedures, community outreach initiatives, and a zero-tolerance policy for bias-driven misconduct. This isn't a quick fix, Marcus said. Real change takes time, effort, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But I promise you this: we will not stop until this department reflects the values of the community it serves. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine. Marcus could see faces in the crowd, some smiling, some nodding, and others still reserved. It wasn't unanimous approval, but it was a step in the right direction. After the presentation, Marcus mingled with attendees, answering questions and listening to feedback. One young officer approached him, her expression earnest. "Director Evans," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you. I joined this force to make a difference. And for a while, I wasn't sure that was possible. But now, I think it might be." Marcus smiled, his voice warm. "It is. And officers like you are the reason why." As the weeks turned into months, the effects of Marcus's reforms became more tangible. Officers reported feeling more confident in their training, and community members began to express cautious trust in the department. There were setbacks, of course, moments when the old ways threatened to resurface, but Marcus and his team remained vigilant. One evening, as Marcus prepared to leave the office, he received an unexpected visitor. Ryan Carter stood in the doorway, looking more subdued than Marcus had ever seen him. "Officer Carter," Marcus said, gesturing for him to enter. "What brings you here?" Carter hesitated before stepping inside. "I wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "The training, the suspension, it made me see things differently. I didn't like you for a long time, but now I get it. You weren't trying to tear us down. You were trying to make us better." Marcus regarded Carter for a moment, then nodded. "Change isn't easy, Carter, but it's necessary. I'm glad you've come to understand that." Carter extended a hand, and after a brief pause, Marcus shook it. The gesture was small but meaningful, a symbol of the bridge Marcus had worked so hard to build. Months later, Marcus stood in front of a packed auditorium at the department's annual awards ceremony. He wasn't there to accept an award, but to present one, a new recognition for officers who demonstrated exceptional integrity and commitment to community service. As he handed the first award to a young officer, the applause was thunderous. Marcus looked out at the crowd, seeing faces filled with pride and determination. It wasn't a perfect department, not yet, but it was a better one. And for Marcus, that was enough. As the ceremony ended, Marcus lingered in the empty auditorium, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. Change, he realized, wasn't a destination, it was a constant effort, a daily choice to do better. And as long as he had a voice, he would use it to ensure that the badge stood for what it was meant to: trust, service, and justice. With that thought, he walked out into the night, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.